Yeah, how's John? And and this so you know this is part two of how we have evolution so ass backwards. I don't have my hat on, so you know it's part two. But anyway, so another thing I'm thinking it's like the way they explain evolution is what is it see like they're going by the bones they're finding from the Neanderthal days. They're finding bones in caves and stuff or wherever. And the thing is, we see, for all we know, the Neanderthals could have cremated, you know, they could have cremated more than buried. I mean, maybe they never buried their dead anyway. Maybe the Neanderthals cremated they're dead. And you had certain strays. Here's the way I look at it, okay? Back in the day, back in the day, like in the Neanderthal days, even back like in, primitive times, like say, generally the people who led the village were the strongest, the biggest, hunters, the best hunters, the best warriors. They basically ran the villages, and it was the pecking order was who was the biggest and strongest back then, who was the best hunter, who was the best warrior, who was in the best shape, who they were the leaders. That's how the pecking order ran. Kind of like when you saw in the movie 300. All the runts got usually banished from the town if they were little runts. They couldn't fight. The little weaker, more feeble-minded parts of the village, they would banish those people. Okay, and they would have to go on their own. Call them weasel rat people. And I think they're the ones, for all we know, the real kings of the Neanderthal. The ones who actually led the tribes. They might have built back then castle type structures where they lived, their villages. We don't know. Maybe 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals built palaces for the warriors. Okay, and all the ones that all the ones that they're finding that were in caves, all the Neanderthals, they were the ones that were banished from the village because they were too small and scrawny. So this is why, like because they're getting their whole thing about how big the average Neanderthal was by these bones they're finding, and they're learning that all these bones, all the people they belong to were like 5'7", 100. Well, yeah, because they were the runts of the town, just like how it worked during the Spartan days. They banished, or they just took the babies that weren't, you know, like the weaker babies, and they used to drop them off the cliff. They did that probably in the Neanderthal days. And all the warriors during the Neanderthal warriors probably got burned and cremated. So you're not going to find any bones or anything from them because they got cremated. But see, these stupid archaeologists, you can tell they're Democrats. You can tell archaeologists, those type people are Democrats, because nothing they come up with makes any sense in the rational world as we see it today. It was the same basic world 50,000 years ago as it is today. It really was. I mean, the same principles remain. The only thing is they didn't have the technology we do. But as far as what humans needed to do to survive, it was the same 100,000 years ago as it is today. Food, shelter, and clothing primarily. Okay, and a source of heat or whatever. So you know that's what So the archaeologists, evolution is completely backwards ass. I think it's completely backwards ass. Like I said, we're only evolving because of technology. Humans are evolving because our technology is getting better, not because we're getting better. We're getting worse. That's why we have to depend on greater technology, because humans are on their own are getting worse. We're getting smaller. We're getting softer naturally. I mean, yeah, the big humans you see, they're on steroids. They weren't taking steroids back in the Neanderthal days. They were naturally bigger and stronger. But nowadays, because as technology grows, humans are declining in their ability. Most humans, okay? As technology grows, humans are shrinking now. We're getting worse as far as being self-dependent. We're getting worse. Neanderthals were way more self. If Neanderthals could survive in our time better than we could survive in theirs, because they were a better species than the Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals were a better species. They were a naturally built better species. They were naturally smarter than we are now. They were naturally bigger than we are now, and they were naturally actually average stronger than we are now. The Neanderthals. You know, You know, if they got it so, I mean, and if they got that backwards, they got everything else. All these other so-called geniuses, they have everything else backwards assed. Okay, it's like, just take it from there. You know, I do, you know, and like I said, the Cro-Magnons were not smarter. It was the opposite way around. The Neanderthals were bigger, stronger, and smarter than the Cro-Magnons were. They were just too nice. They were too. They weren't as mean. They weren't as vicious as the Cro. As man grows in evolution, they get more. Man has become more vicious, more backstabbing, more weasel rat-like as it evolves. The humans have become more weasel rat-like with evolution. Like I said, most of the big guys you meet now, they're not naturally big. They're on steroids nowadays. They're on HGH. They're not naturally that way. They're People are only getting bigger now through man-made means. Man-made means. That's how people are getting bigger, not naturally. Back then, they naturally got bigger and stronger. You know, that's what I believe. It's just so, evolution is just so screwed up. All these so-called archaeologists, they just want to be paid for doing nothing. They want to be paid for doing nothing. They're con men. Archaeologists are con men. They're cons. Okay, they're Democrat cons. You know, because they want to get paid for doing nothing. Psychologists, they want to be paid for doing nothing. That's a bullshit occupation, being a psychologist. That's nothing. They're crazier than the people they treat because it takes one to know one. And psychologists, they're crazier than they're just as crazy as the ones they treat. That's why they know how to treat them, because they think alike, because they are alike. It's just the psychologists. They're cunning enough. They're not smart, but they're cunning enough to act like they're smart, but they're not. They're just another. They're just more Democrats that want to get paid for doing nothing. Archaeologists, all these idiots, because when you put their what they think into the real world that we know now, it makes no sense at all. It makes no sense. Okay. Who cares about those stupid bones again? They lived probably just like the Spartans lived back in the Neanderthal days, where the warriors were the big, they came in all sizes back then, Neanderthals. You had 7-foot Neanderthals. You probably had an average of 7-foot Neanderthals back then. They probably grew up to be 9 feet tall on average, I bet you, the Neanderthals. They would have had to been to survive back then against those huge predators. They would have had to been bigger and stronger and smarter than we are now. Much bigger, stronger, because they didn't have guns back then. They didn't even use good spears or good knives back then. None of those spears or knives they ever made back then could have pierced the skin of a damn prehistoric short-faced bear. They wouldn't stand a chance. The people back then, if they were that small and stupid, wouldn't have stood a chance against the predators back then. They wouldn't have stood a chance. Even in a group, they wouldn't have stood it. Because you know what? Here's another thing. I guarantee you, short-faced bears, they ran in packs back then because they had enough of them back then to run in packs. See? Because, it's just the numbers thing. We can take out species faster now, way faster than back then, because we have the gun, right? So in that case, species exploded back then because they didn't have guns to, they couldn't thin out the herd anywhere near as fast as we can now. So they obviously had way more predators, 10 times more predators, the people back then than we have now, and they were bigger and stronger. So no, archaeologists, you dumbass Democrats, you just want to be paid for doing nothing because you're a bunch of lazy, no good. You're just a bunch of lazy, no good Democrats. Archaeologists are just no good. They just no good. They do the society no good, just like all Democrats don't do real society any good. They come up with these occupations. It's just bullshit. Democrats are just full of crap. Because most Democrats become archaeologists because they want to be lazy and get paid for doing nothing. And all your theories don't hold up in the real rational world. But Democrats don't know because Democrats don't know how to use their rational side of their brain. And they act like they do, but they don't. But it's so stupid how they think evolution is, if you really think about it. It doesn't make any freaking sense because it's wrong. Evolution, we've been taught evolution ass backwards when it comes to human evolution. That's my opinion. I'm sticking with it. So this is going to be all I'm going to talk about. I just want to bitch. It's a bitching hour. I mean, what else? All these occupations like that, white collar occupations, 99% of them aren't even needed in the real world. But do it. I say 100%.